The prairie wind always felt colder around the Harper house. Maybe it was the way the walls didn't seem to hold in warmth, no matter how high the fire burned. Or maybe it was because of Edith. Hazel Harper learned early not to expect kindness from her stepmother. Ever since her real mother died of fever when Hazel was just 7, her father remarried with a speed that left the whole town whispering. Edith came from a wealthy family out east, with stiff manners and the kind of eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. She wore her mourning dress at the wedding, and when Hazel asked why, Edith simply said, "Because joy shouldn't come from someone else's grave." That was the first thing Hazel remembered her saying. Now 21, Hazel had become used to silence at the dinner table, long afternoons scrubbing floors that weren't dirty and rules that changed with Edith's mood. Her father, once full of stories and gentle teasing, had grown quiet, worn down by the constant tension that crackled like a thunderstorm that never broke. He took long rides into town for work, stayed out late, and when he came home, there was nothing left in his eyes. Hazel knew better than to complain. Out here, people survived by enduring. What she couldn't understand was why Edith hated her. She tried to be good, to follow every rule, to keep her eyes down and her thoughts to herself. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. If Hazel left a teacup half-wiped, Edith would call her lazy. If she finished all her chores too quickly, Edith would accuse her of rushing and make her do them again. The worst were the quiet punishments. The books Edith burned when she caught Hazel reading after chores. The time she cut Hazel's hair short with sewing scissors because she said it was vanity, or the meals she skipped by accident on days when Hazel looked too pale. Once, Edith even made her sleep outside after finding a letter Hazel had written to her mother's grave, calling it a pathetic little performance for pity. Her father said nothing. Still, Hazel kept that letter buried beneath a loose floorboard under her bed. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And in it, she told the truth about how scared she was, how lonely, how sometimes she missed her mother so much she felt like her chest would crack open. She wrote about how she felt like a ghost in her own home, seen but not known. The town, if it saw anything, looked the other way. People always did. They saw a well-kept home and a stepmother who gave to the church and assumed things inside must be fine. And maybe Hazel had started to believe that too, that nothing would ever change. That this was just the way life would go, quiet, gray, and small. Then one morning, a man came to the door. Hazel opened it, still wiping flour off her hand for baking bread, and froze. He wasn't from around here. That much was clear. He had dust on his coat, like he'd ridden through half the county, and eyes that searched too deeply, like he was used to seeing more than people wanted to show. "Is this the Harper place?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Hazel said. She didn't mean to sound afraid, but the edge crept in anyway. "I'm looking for William Harper," he said. "He home. He's in town," Hazel said. "Won't be back till evening." The man nodded slowly, his gaze flicking over her face like he was trying to place her in a story he hadn't finished writing. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hazel." He paused a beat longer than most would. Then he nodded, tipped his hat, and said, "Tell him Seth Carter stopped by. He'll know why." He turned to go, but something about the way he moved, too quiet for someone his size, too smooth, made Hazel's stomach twist. She shut the door gently, but her hands were shaking. She knew that name. Seth Carter wasn't a stranger. Not really. Her father had spoken of him once, years ago, when he thought she was asleep near the fire. Carter had been his friend once, closer than a brother, he said, but something had happened between them. A deal gone wrong. Land, or maybe gold. Her father didn't say much, only that Carter was dangerous. That if he ever showed up, they were to tell him nothing. So why had he come? Why now? That evening, Hazel didn't tell her father. She watched him eat, eyes heavy, body slumped with weariness. The lines around his mouth looked deeper, and his hands shook slightly as he lifted his cup. She told herself it was because she didn't want to worry him, but part of her was afraid. Not of Carter, of what her father might do if he knew. Days passed. and Carter didn't return. But something had changed. Hazel felt it like a storm cloud rising over the hills, something coming, slow but certain. Edith started locking the drawer where she kept her letters, and Hazel noticed a new tension in her movements, like she was waiting for someone to knock again. Then one afternoon, Hazel heard them arguing. Her father's voice, low but urgent, and Edith's sharper, slicing through the air like broken glass. "He knows, William. He's come for it. He can't prove anything. You don't know that." Hazel pressed her ear to the thin wall and held her breath. "If he talks, it all falls apart," Edith said. "You promised me this would stay buried." "It will," her father said, "if you keep your mouth shut." The words sank into Hazel's chest like cold water. Buried? What are they buried? For days, Hazel tried to act like nothing had changed, but her heart wouldn't settle. She started waking in the night, hands clenched, gasping from dreams she couldn't remember. Her eyes darted to shadows, and every knock at the door made her flinch. And still, she said nothing, until the night she followed Edith into the woods. It wasn't planned. She just saw her stepmother slipping out after supper, dressed too fine for a walk, moving fast and secretive. Hazel waited a few minutes, then wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out too, keeping her steps quiet, like she used to when she'd sneak out to read by the creek. Edith didn't go far, just past the ridge, near the old well that had gone dry years ago. Hazel crouched behind a tree and watched. Edith knelt by the stones, pulled something from her coat, and dropped it inside. The sound it made, a hard thud against old rock, echoed too loudly in the still air. Then Edith turned and said, "You can come out now." Hazel froze. "I heard you 5 minutes ago," Edith said without looking. "You're not as quiet as you think." Hazel stepped out slowly. Her hands were sweating. "What was that?" she asked. Edith didn't answer, just looked at her, eyes flat and unreadable. "You always were too curious," she said, "just like your mother." The way she said it, it wasn't a compliment. Hazel looked at the well, then at her stepmother, and for the first time, she felt something shift. Not fear, not sadness, anger. It burned hot and sharp, and it made her stand straighter, speak louder. "What did you put in there?" Edith smiled. "Something that should have stayed buried." Hazel didn't sleep the night she saw Edith at the well. Her mind kept circling what she'd heard, something that should have stayed buried. The words scratched against her thoughts like thorns. She kept trying to reason through it, but every path led to the same dead end. There was something Edith and her father were hiding, and Seth Carter's sudden appearance wasn't a coincidence. The next morning, Edith acted like nothing had happened. She buttered bread, poured coffee, and asked Hazel to sweep the porch as if they weren't standing in a house stuffed with secrets. Hazel did as she was told, but she kept her eyes sharp and her ears open. Later that afternoon, while gathering eggs from the henhouse, Hazel saw a wagon coming up the road. Not many strangers came this far out unless they were looking for something or someone. As it got closer, she saw 2 people in the front seat, a man with sun-worn skin and a woman with a scarf tied tight around her head, even though it was warm out. Hazel wiped her hands and stepped down to meet them as they stopped near the fence. "You must be Hazel," the man said. His voice was smooth, but carried a weight that made her uneasy. "Name's Thomas Briggs. This here's my sister, Ruth." Ruth gave a polite nod, her mouth tight. "We're looking for your father," Thomas continued. "Ian, he's at the mill," Hazel said, watching them both carefully. "Won't be back till near sundown." Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then maybe you can help us. We've come a long way, and I'd rather not waste a trip." Hazel hesitated. "Help you how?" "We're settling a matter from a long time ago," Ruth said, speaking up. "Something that belongs to us. Your father'll understand when we speak to him." Her tone was soft, but there was something about the way she held herself, rigid, like someone holding back a storm. "I'll tell him you stopped by," Hazel said. Thomas didn't push, but as they turned the wagon around, Ruth looked back and gave Hazel a look that sat with her long after the dust settled. It wasn't cruel. It was pity. And that scared Hazel more than anything. That evening, when her father returned, Hazel didn't mention the visit. She watched him slump into his chair and stare at the fire as Edith laid out supper. There was something distant in his face, like he was always listening for footsteps behind him. Afterward, Hazel slipped out to the barn and found the one person she could trust with the truth, or at least part of it. Eli Matthews had been her friend since they were children. He lived on a neighboring ranch and often helped with their cattle when her father was away. Eli was steady, quiet, with a kindness that ran deep, even when he didn't say much. Hazel found him brushing down one of the horses. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. She didn't tell him everything. Not yet, but she told him about Edith going to the well and the strange visitors who'd come that day. Eli listened without interrupting, his hands still moving slowly along the horse's neck. "Something's coming," Hazel finished. "I can feel it, and I don't know who to trust." Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What if you're the only one you can?" His words settled heavy in her chest. "Promise me something," he added. "If things get worse, you'll leave. You'll come to my uncle's place up in Three Pines. You won't ask questions." Hazel wanted to say yes, but her throat tightened. "I can't leave my father." "You sure he'd do the same for you?" That stung. But Hazel didn't answer. The next day, Hazel spotted Ruth again, alone this time, walking near the church on her way back from town. Against her better judgment, Hazel approached. "You looking for something?" she asked. Ruth turned, clearly surprised to see her. "Just thinking," she said. "A lot of memories in this place." "You knew my father?" Hazel asked. Ruth smiled, but it didn't last. "Not the way you think. But yes, years ago, he and my brother ran in the same circles." Hazel looked at her closely. "Why now? Why come all this way?" "Because the past doesn't stay quiet forever," Ruth said. And she looked Hazel dead in the eye. "And because we finally know where the bodies are buried." Hazel's blood turned to ice. "I don't mean that literal," Ruth said quickly, like she'd gone too far. "But some things, they don't rot, Hazel. They haunt." She didn't say anything else before walking away. Hazel stood frozen on the steps of the church, the sun suddenly feeling far too bright. That night, Hazel found a locked box beneath her father's bed. The key, she already knew, was on the chain he wore around his neck, tucked beneath his shirt. When he slept, he never moved much. She waited until the fire died, low, and his breathing slowed. Then, heart pounding, she slipped the chain off his neck and opened the box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, old and yellowed. Some from Seth Carter, others from Thomas Briggs. Most were about land, disputes, threats, promises. One was from Ruth. It wasn't dated, but Hazel guessed it was at least a decade old. In it, Ruth wrote about a child, about betrayal, about something taken. Hazel didn't understand it all, but one thing became clear. These people believed her father had stolen something from them. And not just land. Later, when she confronted him, without saying she'd read the letters, her father looked more tired than angry. "There are things you don't understand," he said. "Things I did to survive. Your mother, she knew. She helped me. We did what we had to. What did you take from them?" Hazel asked quietly. He didn't answer, just stared into the fire like it held all the answers. Over the next few days, Hazel noticed more changes. Edith started going into town almost daily, returning with a pale face and clenched fists. Her father took to carrying a pistol inside the house. And Seth Carter came back. He rode up again at dusk and didn't ask for her father. This time he asked for Hazel. "Your family owes me something," he said. "And if they won't make it right, maybe you can." "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice wavered. "You will," he said. "When the truth comes out, you'll see just what kind of man William Harper really is." She wanted to scream at him, to demand he stop speaking in riddles, but something in her heart whispered that he wasn't lying, that her father wasn't the man she tried so hard to defend. As the days went on, Hazel started seeing everything differently. Edith's cruelty, her father's silence, even Eli's quiet loyalty. Everyone was hiding something. Then one morning, Eli showed up with blood on his sleeve. "I was followed last night," he said. "Someone wanted to send a message. They're not waiting anymore." Hazel sat down hard on the porch step. The world was unraveling around her, and she still didn't know why. "I need to know what's going on," she said. "No more riddles." Eli hesitated. Then he looked her in the eye. "Your father and Seth, back when you were just a baby, they ran a claim out west. It was Ruth's family land. There was gold in the creek, but no one knew yet. They found out, and instead of telling Ruth's folks, they made a deal to take it for themselves." Hazel's stomach dropped. "There was a fire," Eli went on. "Killed Ruth's brother. They say it was an accident. Others say it wasn't." Hazel's voice barely rose above a whisper. "And my mother? She stood by him," Eli said. "That's all I know. But she never spoke about it." So this was the truth. This was the secret buried under their porch, beneath the dry well, behind all the letters. A stolen fortune, a dead boy, a fire that might have been set on purpose. And now Hazel stood in the middle of it, no longer sure who to protect and who to fear. The wind had a bite to it now. Autumn crept over the hills in long shadows, the kind that made everything feel a little older, a little more fragile. Hazel couldn't look at her father the same after what Eli told her. And the letters, they haunted her. Even the way he laughed felt different now, like a sound borrowed from another man. Still, part of her ached with loyalty. He had raised her, held her when she cried as a child, taught her to ride. And yet the truth of what he'd done, what he might still be hiding, dug into her heart like a thorn. But Hazel didn't fall apart. She couldn't. Something in her had hardened, not into anger, but resolve. There was no undoing the past, but maybe there was a way to stop it from swallowing everything. She started watching more carefully, listening, thinking. She kept the letters hidden in her skirt lining. Every morning, before anyone else woke, she'd read one more, piecing together the story like a puzzle she never asked for. In the middle of it all, she found herself growing closer to Eli. He came by often now, more than he needed to, always with an excuse. A broken fence, a lame horse, a bag of flour they didn't ask for. And Hazel didn't push him away. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But one afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn pink and bruised over the hills, Hazel asked, "Why do you help me, Eli? Why do you stay?" He thought for a long time before answering. "Because I remember what it was like watching someone you love turn into a stranger." She looked at him, surprised. "Who?" "My mother," he said. "She wasn't cruel, not like Edith. But when my pa died, something in her broke. She drank too much, let the house fall apart. I tried to keep us together, but in the end, I couldn't fix her." It was the most he'd ever said about his past. Hazel reached over and took his hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That night, as she lay in bed, Hazel let herself cry for the first time in weeks. Not just for what had been done, but for what had been lost. For the mother she barely remembered. For the girl she used to be. And maybe a little for Eli too. A few days later, Edith found Hazel in the kitchen, quietly washing dishes. There was something different in her stepmother's face, something unsettled. "I saw you with him," Edith said. "With who?" "Eli Matthews." "Don't play stupid." Hazel dried her hands and met her eyes. "We're friends. You think that boy's gonna save you?" Edith scoffed. "You think love is stronger than what's coming? He'll run like the rest when the blood starts to spill." Hazel didn't flinch. "Maybe he won't. Maybe he's stronger than you think." Edith leaned in close. "You don't know what your father's capable of. But I do. And if you keep pushing, you're going to find out the hard way." Hazel didn't say a word, but something in her settled right then, like a weight dropping into place. She wasn't afraid of Edith anymore. Still, things grew darker around the edges. Seth Carter returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought with him a man named Orrin Pike, rough-spoken and thick-necked, with scars on his knuckles and a voice that scraped like gravel. Orrin didn't bother with pleasantries. He came to the door, looked Hazel up and down, and said, "Tell your father we're done waiting." Her father didn't respond well. That night, Hazel found him in the barn, drinking straight from the bottle, pacing like a trapped animal. She stepped in quietly, and he didn't notice at first. "Is it true?" she asked. He turned, startled. "What?" "What they said. About the gold. The fire. The boy who died." He looked away, jaw tight. "You shouldn't believe everything people say." I read the letters. That broke something in him. He slumped against the beam and let the bottle fall. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We were going to split it fair. Ruth's brother, Daniel, he found out. Threatened to go to the law. We tried to stop him from talking. We just wanted to scare him. The fire, that wasn't the plan." Hazel's stomach twisted. "But you took the land. It was too late to turn back," he said. "And your mother, she didn't want to leave. We thought we could build something better, something cleaner. But it never went away. Because it wasn't yours," Hazel said. Her voice shook, but her eyes stayed firm. "It was built on someone else's grave." He didn't answer. After that night, things started moving faster. Word got out in town that Carter and Briggs were filing claims to challenge Harper's ownership of the land. Old rumors began to stir, and the townfolk, once comfortably distant, started whispering again. Hazel noticed how people looked at her differently now. Some with pity, some with suspicion. She didn't care. Her focus was on one thing: stopping this from getting worse. She found Ruth in the churchyard again and walked straight up to her. "If I gave you proof," Hazel said, "would you promise not to hurt him?" Ruth studied her. "Proof of what?" "Everything. The gold, the fire, the letters. But you can't go after him with a gun. You have to do it legal." Ruth's mouth tightened. "Legal didn't work back then. Why would it now?" "Because I'll stand with you," Hazel said. "I'll testify. I'll tell the truth, even if it ruins me too." That gave Ruth pause. Her voice softened. "You're not like him." "No," Hazel said, "but I'm still his daughter." A day later, Hazel handed over the letters. All of them. She didn't cry when she let them go. She didn't tremble. That night, Eli came to her window with a lantern. "You need to leave," he said. "I already made my choice," she told him. "So did I," he said. "I'm not letting you do this alone." They left before dawn, heading toward 3 Pines. Not to run, but to wait, to stay out of the crossfire while the truth made its way through the courts. But the past didn't let go so easy. They were barely 10 miles out when Orrin Pike caught up to them. He didn't say a word, just raised a gun and fired. Eli pushed Hazel off the horse, and the bullet caught him in the shoulder. She screamed, scrambled to drag him behind a fallen log. Another shot whistled past her ear. She didn't know where the courage came from, but she grabbed Eli's revolver, stood up, and fired back. Orrin didn't expect that. Her shot missed, but it made him hesitate long enough for a rancher from the nearby homestead, who'd heard the gunfire, to come barreling out with a rifle. Orrin ran. Eli was bleeding, but he'd live. Hazel rode back with him cradled against her. Her hands never stopped shaking. Back in 3 Pines, word spread fast. The attack made people pay attention. Seth Carter tried to distance himself from Orrin, but it was too late. The sheriff had enough now: letters, testimonies, and now attempted murder. When Ruth testified, she didn't cry. She read her brother's name out loud, and her voice never broke. Hazel sat beside her, holding her hand. Edith left before the hearing even began, packed a trunk, took the money, and vanished. Hazel didn't try to stop her. Her father, though, he stayed. Faced the charges. He didn't deny the letters. Didn't fight the sentence. He just looked at Hazel one last time, like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. She never visited him in jail. Not once. In the quiet that followed, Hazel and Eli tried to find something like peace. The land was stripped from the Harper name, divided among the rightful heirs. Hazel didn't fight it. She didn't want it anymore. She and Eli started over on a little patch of soil up near the Pines, just big enough for a house, a garden, and a future. Some nights, when the wind carried the scent of smoke, Hazel still woke in a sweat, heart pounding. But Eli was always there. He never asked her to forget, only to breathe. They built a life out of the pieces left behind. Not perfect, not painless, but real. And that was enough. The frost came early that year, creeping across the fields like a warning. Hazel felt it in her bones, the same way a wounded animal might feel the storm coming. Life with Eli had begun to settle, not into peace exactly, but into something steady. They woke early, worked hard, slept with the windows open and the wind in their hair. For a while, it was enough. But winter has a way of unearthing what's been buried, and not all ghosts stay quiet forever. It started with a letter, again, folded tight and delivered by a boy who didn't wait for a tip. Hazel opened it alone, in the barn where no one could hear her breathing hitch. It wasn't from her father. It wasn't from Ruth. It was from a county court. Seth Carter had filed an appeal. She read the words 3 times before she could make sense of them. He was claiming unlawful seizure of property, coercion of testimony, even forging documents. And worse, he'd hired lawyers from the East. Men who didn't care about the truth, only how to twist it until no one could tell which way was up. Hazel didn't tell Eli that night. She needed time to think, to decide what it meant. But he knew something was wrong. He watched her closely over dinner, then reached for her hand across the table. "You're holding your breath again," he said gently. "You only do that when something's wrong." She hesitated, then slid the letter across the table. He read it once, then twice. When he looked up, his jaw was set tight. "He's not done with us," Eli said. He never was. They didn't sleep much after that. Hazel paced, eyes hollow with worry. If Carter's appeal held, everything they'd done, everything her father confessed, everything Ruth sacrificed, could be undone. The land might go back into Carter's hands. Her name might be dragged through court again. And worse, Eli could be targeted again. He still carried the scar from Orrin's bullet. "We need help," she said the next morning. "Someone who knows how to fight this." Eli nodded. "Ruth." Hazel bit her lip. "I was thinking someone with more teeth." That same day, she rode to the edge of town and knocked on the door of the one person she had sworn never to see again. Her father's old partner, Emmett Boyd. He opened the door slow, like he expected a punch instead of a visitor. His face was older, his frame thinner, but the eyes were still sharp. He stared at her like he was looking at a ghost. "I need your help," Hazel said. "I figured," Emmett muttered, stepping aside. "No one ever comes out here unless they do." She laid it all out: Carter's appeal, the forged claims, the hired lawyers. Emmett listened without interruption. When she was done, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Carter's dirtier than a hog pen, but he's not stupid," he said. "He's trying to drag it out till everyone's too tired to keep fighting. Will it work? It might, but there's a way to stop him. Not legal, not clean, but effective." Hazel frowned. "I don't want anyone else hurt." Emmett's eyes darkened. "Then you better be ready to fight him in court again. And you'll need more than just Ruth. You'll need everyone he ever crossed." It became Hazel's new mission: gather the broken pieces of everyone Carter had stepped on and turn them into a wall he couldn't climb. She visited homesteaders who lost land to crooked deals. She spoke with miners who were cheated out of pay. She sat down with widows whose husbands died under accidents Carter orchestrated. Slowly, painfully, she stitched together a case. But it took a toll. Eli watched her fade, dark circles under her eyes, her voice brittle from arguing. He tried to protect her, to carry the weight when she couldn't. But even he couldn't stop the storm from swallowing her. "You can't fix everything," he said one night, after she returned home soaked from riding through sleet. "If I don't try," Hazel said, teeth chattering, "what was the point of surviving it?" He wrapped her in a blanket and held her while she cried. She hadn't done that in weeks. It felt like her ribs were breaking open. Then came the fire. It started in the barn. Eli caught the smoke before it reached the house, but by then, the hayloft was gone and 2 horses were dead. The sheriff said it was lightning. Eli said it was no accident. And deep down, Hazel knew he was right. They rebuilt what they could, but the fear lingered in the air like ash. Eli started sleeping with a rifle by the bed. Hazel checked the locks, 3 times every night. Still, it didn't leave. They'd run once, and they wouldn't do it again. The appeal trial began in late November, just as the first snow fell. Hazel took the stand again, and so did Ruth and Emmett and half the valley. The Eastern lawyers picked at every sentence, turned every truth into a maybe. But Hazel didn't break. Her voice didn't shake. If Carter wanted to scare her back into silence, he'd failed. But the hardest moment came when they called her father to testify again. He looked older, grayer. Prison had stolen his pride, but not his presence. When he stepped into the courtroom, everything stopped. He didn't look at Hazel. He told the truth again, word for word. When they tried to trip him up, he didn't flinch. But afterward, when the judge called recess, he asked to speak to her. Alone. They met in a side room. Hazel stood by the door. He didn't try to get close. "I know you'll never forgive me," he said, "but I had to say thank you." "For what?" she asked, voice tight. "For doing what I never could. For stopping it." She swallowed hard. "I didn't do it alone." He nodded. "But you started it." She didn't cry when he left, but the ache in her chest stayed. Back home, after the trial closed, Hazel sat by the fire with Eli, waiting for the verdict. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When the letter arrived, she opened it with shaking hands. Appeal denied. Land redistributed. Charges upheld. It was over. But the cost was heavy. Their farm still bore the scars, the burnt beams, the empty stalls. Eli's shoulders still ached when it rained. And Hazel? She smiled more now, but it never quite reached her eyes the way it used to. Some things couldn't be undone, but they could be survived. And sometimes that was enough. The winter dragged long and hard, wrapping the land in silence. The snow muffled everything. Voices, footsteps, even memories, it seemed. Hazel kept moving through the cold, mending what had been broken, trying to patch the holes in her life as she patched the walls of the barn. But something still sat inside her, heavy and unfinished. Though Carter's appeal was denied and the court had ruled in their favor, peace hadn't come. Not really. Her father was behind bars. Edith had left town under a cloud of shame. And still, Hazel couldn't shake the weight pressing on her chest. The town moved on quicker than she did. People whispered less now. They nodded to her at the general store, offered quiet respect instead of suspicion. Ruth was back to raising her niece, the child of the brother she had lost and the woman who died too young. Sometimes she brought the grandmother to the farm, and Hazel would sit with her in the hay, brushing out the mane of the one horse that survived the fire. The grandmother asked quiet, careful questions. Hazel never lied to her. She couldn't. But even as the world tried to right itself, Hazel felt the unfinished parts of her past pulling tighter. Every time she walked past the dry well, every time she spotted that chipped green ring in her drawer, it reminded her some answers had never come. And the silence from her father, though expected, gnawed at her. He had confessed, but never explained, never truly admitted what had driven him to stand by while people suffered and died. Then one day in early spring, a letter arrived, postmarked from the prison, her name written in her father's sharp, tidy handwriting. She sat on the porch steps for a long time before opening it. The wind pushed at the edges, but she pulled it tight. Inside, just a few short lines. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I wouldn't deserve it. But there is more you need to know. If you're willing to listen, I'll be waiting." She read it twice, then folded it and slipped it into her coat pocket. That evening, she told Eli she had to make the trip alone. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, kissed her hand, and helped saddle the horse. The prison wasn't far, but it felt like another world. Stone walls, iron gates, faces dulled by time and routine. She waited in a cold room with metal chairs and a flickering oil lamp overhead. When her father stepped through, she barely recognized him. He'd grown thinner, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. Then finally, he said, "Thank you for coming. I don't know why I did." "I do." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You want to know why I let it happen? Why I let her bury that child? Why I stayed quiet when Ruth's brother burned. Hazel nodded. Her throat was too tight to speak. Because I was weak, he said. Because I thought survival mattered more than doing what was right. I'll let Edith convince me we had no choice. That if the truth came out, we'd lose everything. And I agreed with her. You could have stopped it, Hazel whispered. You could have saved her. He flinched. I know. Hazel stared at him, fury and grief rising in like her flood by. You looked me in the eye every day and let me believe we were good people. I wanted to believe it too, he said. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I raised you right, it would balance the scales somehow. It didn't, she said, eyes burning. All it did was ruin us both. Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. I know, he said again, barely more than a whisper. Then something shifted in her. Not forgiveness, never that, but something closer to understanding. A clarity that came he was no monster, just because a man who had chosen wrong too many times and lost the courage to fix it. I came here for the truth, she said, and you gave me that. But don't ever think that means I'll forget. I wouldn't, he said. She stood, the legs of the chair scraping back across stone. This is the last time I'll come. I figured. When she left, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hills. She rode slowly, feeling the wind in her face, letting it carry away some of the weight she'd been holding for so long. There were no more lies to chase, no more confessions to drag in the light. The truth had been unearthed, and it was ugly, but it was real. Back home, Eli was waiting with supper on the stove and a quiet look in his eyes. She sat down across from him, and for the first time in weeks, ate without feeling sick. I saw him, she said. He didn't ask questions. He only reached for her hand, and something inside her finally loosened. In the days that followed, Hazel began to build again. Not just the barn or fences, but herself. She spent more time in the sun, less time chasing ghosts. She laughed, sometimes even loud enough for Eli to tease her about it. She began teaching Ruth's niece how to ride, and the girls' laughter filled the air like a balm. But even as life moved forward, Hazel knew healing didn't mean forgetting. There were always scars, both visible and not. What happened to that child, what happened to Ruth's brother, what her father had allowed, it would never leave her. But it didn't have to control her anymore. One afternoon, as the first flowers pushed through the thawing soil, Hazel took the greenstone ring from its drawer and rode out to the edge of the property. She knelt by the dry well and sat there for a long while, tracing the stone with her thumb. Then, without a word, she dropped it inside. A quiet goodbye. Later that night, she sat with Eli on the porch, her head against his shoulder, watching the stars. Do you think it ever really ends? She asked. The pain. She nodded. No, he said, but I think it gets quieter. And then one day, you realize it's not part of who you are, but only part of you are. She looked up at him. And who am I now? He smiled. Someone who faced the fire and walked out the other side. She didn't answer right away, but in her heart, for the first time in years, she felt something, the beginning of peace. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real, and it was hers. As the stars blinked above and the wind settled soft across the plains, Hazel knew something deep in her bones. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her. The truth had broken her once. Now it had set her free. Spring came slow, but sure. The snow melted in patches, then sheets, soaking the earth until green began to push through. It wasn't a sudden change. It came in soft moments. The way the horses stretched their legs longer each morning. The way the creek came back to hum again. And the way Hazel breathed a little deeper now. Her days were full now, but not frantic. The court battles were over, and Carter gone from the headlines. His lawyers packed their bags, and the county shut him out for good. No one in town missed him, not even those who'd stood quietly by his side. Hazel didn't speak of him much anymore. What was there to say? The real work, the harder work, was quieter. It wasn't just rebuilding the barn one board at a time with Eli. Not because they needed shelter anymore, but because doing it together reminded them of what they'd saved. It was on a town and looking people in the eye, not flinching when they said her name. It was writing to Ruth every week, even if some letters went unanswered. And it was learning to live without the shadow of her father always stretching long behind her. He died in the spring. Pneumonia, they said. The letter came from the warden, dry and polite. Hazel didn't cry when she read it. But that night, after the lantern was out, she lay in bed with her back to Eli and whispered, "He's gone." Eli rolled toward her and said nothing. He just reached across the space between them and pulled her close. They've buried her father on the land he'd once owned, in a corner he'd always said he wanted to be planted. No crowd, no sermon, just Hazel, Eli, Ruth, and Hazel's niece. They laid him down beneath a crooked pine, the wind tugging at Hazel's skirt as she pushed a handful of wildflowers into the soil. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something like release. Afterward, Ruth stayed behind as Eli took the girl back to herself. They stood side by side, silent. "You didn't have to come," Hazel said. "I know," Ruth answered. "But he was your father. And once, he was kind to me before everything turned to rot." Hazel nodded. "It doesn't make sense, does it? How people are sometimes good and awful in the same breath." "No," Ruth said. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's seeing them fully and still choosing yourself." They didn't speak again. They stood there in that soft soil until the wind chilled their skin. Then Ruth reached over and took Hazel's hand. It was the first time in years. She held it tight. When it walked back to the wagon, it didn't let go. That summer, life settled into a rhythm Hazel hadn't known before. Not fear or shame or the need to prove something. Just that kind of quiet, steady living that made days pass sweet and left her tired in a good way. The farm gave enough. Eli gave a row of peach trees near the ridge, and they bloomed in late June, small pink bursts of life against the blue sky. She took teaching Ruth's niece letters on the porch, using old books and chalk on slate. The girl was sharp, always asking questions Hazel sometimes couldn't answer. Why do some people lie when the truth would be easier? Why did her barn burn down? Why don't you smile when people talk about your mother? Hazel never lied to her for asking. She told the truth as best she could. "Because people are scared," she said one day, as the girl traced her fingers in the dust. "And scared people do foolish things, hurtful things." "Did you ever lie like that?" "Yes," Hazel said quietly. "More than once." "Are you still scared now?" She thought about it. "Sometimes, but not like before." The girl looked up at her. "I think that means you're brave." Hazel smiled then, not the thin kind she'd gotten good at, but a real one. Later that evening, as Eli was cleaning tools in the shed, she stood on the porch, watching the sun settle low behind the hills. She could hear the sound of the creek now, and it didn't haunt her anymore. It sang. Eli came up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist. "She's fond of you," he said into her hair. "She's a better version of us," Hazel answered. "Not touched by that poison." "Maybe," he said, "or maybe she's just proof we did something right." She turned in his arms. "Sometimes we're different now." He looked at her, his brow softening. "You are. I thought surviving all that meant I'd always carry it like a weight. But it's starting to feel not like a burden, more like roots." Eli didn't answer. He just kissed her. Slow. Sure. And in that moment, she knew something had shifted inside her completely. She didn't live for the fight anymore. She lived because of what came after. In August, they held a gathering. Not a big one, just a handful of neighbors, a few friends from town, Ruth and the girl, and a new couple who'd bought the old Harper place down the road. Hazel made pies with fresh berries. Eli strung lanterns from a porch. It wasn't fancy, but when the sun dipped low and laughter filled the yard, Hazel stood barefoot in the grass and felt something she hadn't in years. Belonging. She caught Ruth's eye across the yard. Ruth raised a glass. Hazel nodded back. As the night wore on and folks drifted home, Hazel and Eli sat on the porch again, feet bare, hands linked. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked quietly. Sometimes, she admitted, but only the old version of me. She wanted to run. This version, she wants to stay. He squeezed her hand. Then we'll stay. That fall, they harvested more than they expected. The peach trees gave them a few small fruits, sour but promising. Hazel canned what she could, laughing when one jar exploded on the stove. Ruth's niece drew little labels for each jar, spelling pesh and jelly in crooked letters that Hazel tucked away in a box she labeled Keep Forever. One morning, before the first frost, Hazel rode out to the far ridge. Alone, she brought nothing but a piece of folded paper and a stone. It was where she'd once hidden to cry, where she'd imagined what life might be if she'd only had the courage to choose herself. Now, she sat and read the letter her father wrote her again. Then she buried it under the stone, not out of hate, not out of shame, but to mark that it had happened, that it mattered, and that it was done. She looked out over the valley, golden in the light, and whispered, "It's done." Then she rode home. In the months that followed, they talked sometimes about having a child. Not urgently, not with pressure, but softly, like it was a song they both knew the words to but were waiting for the right time to sing. Until then, there was plenty to care for. The farm, each other, the small growing things they tended with patience. Hazel still carried her story, but it didn't carry her anymore. She'd made peace, not clean or easy, but real. She'd seen the worst in people and the best, and learned to hold both truths at once. And when she smiled now, it reached her eyes. Every time,